Hello and welcome to the Comparesoft ERP Podcast. Today we're getting into what it really takes for manufacturers to get their supply chain performance under control. I'm joined by Lee Wachter, a former CIO and COO with deep experience across manufacturing and consumer packaged goods. Lee has held senior leadership roles at Olympus and Diageo. He's worked with companies like Pepsi and Citibank, and he spent time within an ERP vendor. We unpack today's conversation in three parts. First, what it takes to stabilise a failing supply chain operation. Second, how to select a reliable ERP system that holds up under real operational pressure. And third, how to layer AI on top of working ERP to optimise planning, inventory and decision making. Lee, it's great to have you on the podcast. How are you?
I'm great. It's great to be here, Ryan, and I appreciate the hour we're going to spend together.
Excellent.
It'll be very good.
So you're currently running your own independent operation, Lee. How would you best describe your role as a fractional CIO?
Yeah, I'm running Interactive Ingenuity, and basically I work with mid-market manufacturers and consumer goods companies, typically $50 to $250 million in revenue. And really what they've done is they've outgrown their operating model. They may not trust the data that they're utilizing, and they're not running the business as efficiently as they could. So I've served as a CIO, a COO, and worked inside an ERP vendor, if you will, and I've seen the supply chain from both sides. So in my role, what I try to do is align the technology, the operations, and the financial performance specifically within the supply chain. And as a fractional CIO or a CTO, I don't really operate like a CIO. My role is to really ensure that the ERP system is running efficiently and that it's a trusted system of record that management can rely on to make decisions about inventory, procurement, and the execution of that. And then what I do when I'm called in is I help leadership stabilize the foundation, governance, planning discipline, and all of the different functionality associated with running a supply chain, and make sure that we're moving off of spreadsheets and that you're actually using the ERP system to make decisions. And then once I do that, I also help the people who run the supply chain get to the data that they need in order to, again, assess the situation, analyze the data, and come up with the biggest or the best decisions that they can. And only once when the foundation is stable and the organization can respond quickly and people trust the system as the system of record, does it make sense to layer AI on top of that to improve decision quality.
That's excellent. And so, yeah, you sort of positioned yourself as someone who, assists these manufacturing CPG companies in recovering and optimizing their supply chain operations. I'm curious, what's the most common stage you're called in, if they want to get their supply chain operations in order?
Sure. That's a great question. And most of the time I'm called in, this ERP system may be up, it's live, transactions are flowing, but there's some kind of inventory problem, there's a service level problem, margins are eroding, let's say through chargebacks. There's a lot of expedition going on. In other words, moving goods quickly and paying extra for that. And essentially management begins to feel like there's a sense of loss of trust relative to what the system's doing. Okay. And that point it becomes, and also planners are relying on spreadsheets, buyers are overriding the system, and there's a lot of decision making going on exogenous or outside the system itself. So I'll get called in. And then when that happens, it's really not a technology issue. It's an operating model issue. And another point is I often get called in if there's a new CEO or a new CFO or et cetera, and they're in the midst of an implementation and something is going sideways. So I'll come in, I'll assess where we are, and then I'll figure out, okay, what's the plan we're following? What corrective actions do we need to take? And make sure that we can get the program and the implementation project moving ahead smoothly. Okay, so my role in that case is to assess quickly, determine what the breakdown is, come up with a game plan, and move forward from there. And again, the objective in either case is straightforward, is getting the ERP operational, the data operational, people comfortable with it, the trust level up. And only when those factors are in place does it make sense to move into AI where we can create real value.
So you touched on a few telltale signs there, some signals where if you're coming in and the supply chain operation, it's not at its full capacity. How long does that typically take you to understand, okay, this is wrong, that's wrong, this is what happens? How long does that process take?
Well, that's a double-edged, I've got a double-edged answer there. Firstly, I'm going to feel, I'm going to sense, I'm going to smell this, and I'll kind of know it immediately. Immediately is too quick, but I don't want to jump to any conclusions just because I've seen this movie before. So basically, I'll know what's cooking, but the more important thing is I know I need to be able to assess what's really going on and then be able to communicate that clearly and in a structured manner to management and the operations people. I just can't walk in and,
Mm.
I need to really have my ducks in order, go down to the right level of details. So I'll know quickly, and it depends on the extent to which they're using the ERP system. It can run anywhere between 2, 4, 6 weeks, something to that effect. Because at the end of that, what you really want is a game plan. These are the steps that we need to take in order to fix and address the system. So it's really putting the whole program together that makes the difference.
And what sort of information are you asking for? What sort of data do you want from that company on, say, day one to
Okay.
understand and organize and like planning, procurement, production, fulfillment, like what
Okay.
that actually looks like?
Sure. Okay. That's a really good question, too. So when I walk in on day one, I'm not necessarily looking for one particular problem, although they may say, hey, our inventory is too high, our response
Hmm.
times are not, we're not fulfilling our customer obligations. What I'm really looking for are patterns. And the first signals are rarely dramatic system failures. They're more behavioral and they're structural. Inventory may have a problem. It's climbing faster than revenue. There's inconsistent there's inconsistent service levels. Orders are not being shipped in full and on a timely basis. There's chargebacks, expedition of incoming goods. Finance is struggling to reconcile inventory. The month end is a problem. So those are signals of instability, okay, but they may not be the root cause. So the real flag, and we discussed this a little bit earlier, is lack of trust in the system. People may be working outside the system. They may be working with satellite spreadsheets. They may be overriding what the system is saying. So now you're operating your business on spreadsheets, tribal knowledge, in addition to the ERP system because they've lost trust in it. So then the next thing I look for, however, is explainability. Okay. When inventories go off or you miss a service level or a spike occurs, is there somebody within the organization that can jump into the system, look at the data and say, okay, this is the exact reason why that happened. And if that doesn't happen, that tells me another issue is going on because the data
Mm.
is either not there or the people are not sufficiently versed on how to get to the data to understand the root cause of their problems. And this results in decision latency. So let's say you're consistently late making or delivering orders or something to that effect, and you're not finding out 5 days later. Meanwhile, you're getting complaints from the customer and nobody in your organization knows what's going on or they can handle it. Okay. So the real thing I'm looking for is when something changes or something's off kilter, how quickly is management made aware of it and how quickly it can identify and diagnose the problem to bring it to resolution. If they're running around emails, spreadsheets, look at this report, and it's a little bit of, I'll use the word chaos or discombobulated, that's not a really good sign.
Right. And I'm really interested. So you've had experience in food and beverage manufacturing environments too, which can obviously throw
Hmm.
up its own set of unique challenges.
Hmm.
How do you pressure test whether an existing system can handle things like traceability, shelf life, and compliance? Like, is
Yeah,
there
that's a
is there test scenarios you can run?
Yeah, what I really try to do is say, okay, get down to the bottom and do a reverse recall. We had a problem with if it's food, if it's beverage, if it's chemicals, if it's aeronautics, if it's aerospace, if it's medical devices. Okay, each of those are going to have in some form some type of regulatory requirement in order to respond to that. So you're going to want to be able to look at the entire, I'll call it, one aspect of their supply chain. So it begins with and have traceability down to either the lot or their serial number. So I'll pressure test it from procurement when a product or a component comes in the door or an ingredient comes in the door. Does it go through QA? Okay, then where is it used and what is it? Is it now combined into a different product? And then do you have a lot number or a serial number associated with that? And then if it gets into the warehouse and it goes through distribution and hits the customers, you need traceability from all the way from
Mm.
procurement to distribution and the final sale. So I'll run through a pressure test like that, and that I'm calling a reverse recall and seeing if they can really do that or not. Okay. The other one is how are they managing shelf life ingredients? For example, if something expires, how do they know which product to ship? The
Yeah.
one that's going to expire soonest, or is a warehouse person just walking in and picking product? Is there an orderly fashion to that? Because that's another very important component as well, and that's shelf life. The third one is exception handling. Okay, when something goes wrong or it fails an inspection, or rework, or there's a partial release, how do they manage that whole thing? Okay, so can the ERP explain the current status and then the steps that are supposed to be taken in order to address that particular issue? Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, in a regulated environment, traceability isn't optional. It's most of the time it's going to be regulated
Yeah.
by some governing body. So you really need to have these pieces in place, particularly given the industry that you're operating in.
Yeah, a very thorough approach. Yeah. So if we take a hypothetically, you get to the stage of understanding, business's supply chain issues. You then advise on either remediating or replacing the existing system to ultimately fix and solve these issues. Where do manufacturers typically see the first measurable gains? Once their supply chain fundamentals are fixed.
The first gains usually show up as we've been discussing in stability and working capitalization, okay? Not necessarily advanced optimization. Inventory is generally the earliest lever, and once planning assumptions are corrected and ERP becomes a tried and true and trusted system of record, then you have safety stock that you can rationalize, expedition of orders decreases, okay, excess inventory starts to decline, et cetera, and the cash moving off out of the warehouse and the floor is going back onto the balance sheet. So you're beginning to see a little bit of improvement from an operational perspective, and it translates to an increase in working capital. The next thing that happens is that service levels begin to improve. You're now shipping in full, on time, and with the right paperwork, and you're getting less and less customer complaints, and theoretically that'll turn into more solid and higher retail or customer scorecards when you sit down and you do a QBR business review with them. And this will reduce your chargebacks, penalties, or any customer escalations, okay? There's also it's less visible, but now the decision quality of the people that are operating the supply chain improves. They're beginning to anticipate issues. They can kind of do a little bit more critical thinking about what their role is. And if they're anticipating issues and they can see around corners, that will enable
Mm.
them to manage the supply chain in a much more effective and efficient manner so that customers are happy, your margins are improving, your working capital is going down, and you're moving the business in a proper forward strategic manner.
How do you decide whether the existing ERP can be fixed or, and optimized versus when a system actually needs to be changed?
Okay. All right. First off, I remove the assumption that replacement of the system is a solution, because in most cases it isn't. And what I try to discern is, okay, if they're 80 or 85% of the system is functioning properly, I just want to confirm that in my own mind. Are the core transaction flows, order management, inventory, purchasing, production, financials, are they well established and are those working well?
Mm.
However, what I really try to do now is figure out what may be problematic in the other 15 or 20%. And it's not necessarily about are the features available in that system, it's about governance. And so is the configuration set up? Is the master data set up? Is it being properly managed? Is there appropriate governance? Is there appropriate testing? Is there appropriate standard operating procedures? How planning is done. And then I go from there and figure out, okay, how are exceptions handled? We talked about traceability and so forth. So I really try to dive into those areas. I confirm that 80 or 85% is working. And then I try and figure out what's going on with the 15%, which is kind of like the tail wagging the dog, but it's causing all of these problems. Okay. So it's not, is the ERP good or something to that effect, but it could be, does this particular system support the non-negotiables of this business? And is the proper governance in place to make sure that those things are being properly addressed? Okay. So in food and beverage, again, it could be traceability. In aerospace, it's serial control and it's serial and lot number control, quality history, and in medical or regulated industry, compliance enforcement. Okay. So if those things which are specific to that particular industry are available in the software, is the company actually using the software and all the features inherent to its fullest capability? Okay. So I really try not to get into and say this needs to be replaced, but what do we need to do in order to bring the system along? The other thing that I do is when I look at these problems, it's kind of like a kaleidoscope. It's amazing when you get cross-functional people in a room and one person is doing one thing and it can affect something completely unrelated in their mind. But when you turn a kaleidoscope, if you change one item, the whole picture changes. So you get these people in a room so that they fully understand the end-to-end impact of what they could be doing and how it might affect another function. And when I get them in a room, it also helps to really drill down and be able to get into a lot of detail behind what's really going on with the system.
Excellent. And if it comes to that selecting a new system, we had a nice chat last week, and you said roughly 80% of ERPs do the same thing. In your opinion, what is that 20% that actually differentiates the supply chain outcomes?
Yeah, the 20%, again, what I would do is for that particular industry, well, let me take a step back. You're right, the 80%, we discussed this. In general, 80% of an ERP system across ERP offerings will be very similar in nature and support basic functionality. It's when you get to okay, if there are 15 or 20% of business operations that are critical to that business, then how do you ensure that that particular system or the ERP as you're evaluating it will support those? So what I look for, that I try and identify of all of the capabilities and things the system needs to do, what are those 15 or 20% that are critical to that particular industry and to that particular business? And that's where I start demos. And I want the vendor to be able to set it up, show the data, demonstrate the input, demonstrate the output, and things like that, and make sure that those check marks and those particular pieces of functionality are being supported. And again, like we talked about, it could be traceability, it could be other regulatory issues, but you really surface those. And what I really try to avoid, I don't create an RFP, I don't do anything like that. I zero in on, okay, these are the strategic issues that provide competitive advantage or regulatory support for that business within that industry, and make sure that those things are addressed. Then I move on to other areas such as, okay, and we could talk, I don't want to jump the gun here. The other area is, okay, is there a cultural match between this company and the company that will be your implementation partner? What's their methodology? Will their methodology fit into to the approach that the company looking at the ERP will need? And so I can go into further details about that, but it's not only just the features and functionality, and it's not only the features and functionality for those strategic items, it's also the methodology, the people, a cultural match, and does all of this come together so that you can have a successful project?
Yeah, and you touched on demos there. So important in this type of industry. Which sort of system capabilities tend to look convincing in demos, but they're most likely going to fail when they're introduced on the plant floor or the warehouse?
Okay.
Is there
Yeah.
an example of something that looked great in a demo but failed in reality for you?
Yeah, it could be. And I'll go back to a couple of examples come to mind. It may not be a specific feature, but it's an assumption that the demonstration provides real world scenarios and fit. Okay. Uh, I go back to the company really needs to define their true non-negotiable features up front, and that's what's going to make a difference when you're looking and
Mhm.
running a demo. Yeah, you want to see how the user interface works. You want it to be easy. You want it to be intuitive and things of that nature. But you really need to drill down into those things that are critical for that particular industry. And then one example might be planning coherence. In a demonstration, planning, inventory, execution appear all synchronized. However, in reality, if a supplier lead time shifts or something like that, and the master file isn't updated, how do you know that? So you got to be able to get the early warning signals to let you know something's off here and either adjust your planning data or not. Another one, and we touched on this also, is regulatory documentation. If you're distributing chemicals, for instance, there's a whole series of documents that need to go along with those chemicals when it's picked and when it's tested and when it goes out the door. Same thing for aerospace that we talked about earlier, regulatory, serial number, lot number tracking, QA, those are critical. So those would be the areas that you would probe, okay? I don't necessarily judge the ERP system on how well they demonstrate features, but I
Mhm.
really try and get in to determine whether they support the company's true operating requirements. And that's in standard mode. And that's really where the difference comes in. A 150-page book that you score and somebody gets a 92 and someone gets an 88, it's not going to tell you the real story. The real story is having your user community in front of the participating in the demonstration
Mm.
and watching real time how those critical features are being supported by the ERP system.
And have there been situations where you've been able to test real world data in these systems before going live? Using it as a demo test.
Yeah, you've been able to, yeah, there's definitely, if you can pull the documentation, you're going to if you're already running the business, you already know what these are. You can give them the documentation, you can give them bill of materials, you can give them the QA checklist, you can give them all these things, say, okay, show me how you do this, and then show me the reporting associated with that so I truly know that it's being supported. Absolutely, that's a great idea.
From your time working within an ERP vendor, you're sort of situated in a really good position in terms of ERP selection. What do buyers misunderstand about the vendor's role in that selection? Are there questions you ask that most buyers won't?
Well, yeah, that's a great question because the biggest the biggest misunderstanding that I've seen is assuming the vendor owns the outcome. And that may be motherhood and apple pie. They don't. Leadership of the company that's going to install the ERP owns the outcome. The vendors will provide the software, partners will provide a methodology and technical execution, but the ERP is an operating model, you know, decision that the business must govern. So where I focus is on discipline and governance. There's leadership accountability, which is critical to this. Who's the day-to-day business owner? Will they stay through go live? How quickly does owner, this is really key, how quickly does ownership of the project transition from the vendor and become assumed by the company that's installing the ERP? It's amazing. You could be running a conference room pilot and the vendor will continue to do it. But those companies where someone stands up and says, I'm going to lead the CRP, I'm going to do it, that makes a tremendous difference. The other thing that happens is that those people become your future leaders.
Mm.
They're going to embrace the system. They're going to learn about it. They're going to know your transactions inside and out. And they're also going to be able to operate the system. So that's really critical. We talked about governance and transparency. That's critical in terms of how a risk logged and how are issues managed through, and are they being all ticked off and addressed. And then another piece is data and the cutover, okay, as well as reporting. In some cases, the earlier you start cleaning up your data, the better off you're going to be. Imposing governance, in other words, having single ownership and stewardship of that data. And the other thing that sometimes is often is lost during the project is reporting. So the earlier you get on top of your data, its governance and the reporting that you're going to need, the better off you're going to be, because you will be focused on the transactions, but now you're going to be looking at the data and the output of those transactions. So that's kind of how those are the kind of things that you need to be aware of when you're evaluating and you're working with a vendor.
Yeah, excellent advice. And obviously, an ERP system, it depends on your requirements, the capabilities it's offering. We've touched on 80% are quite similar. In
Yeah.
your experience, what separates an okay ERP vendor from an outstanding one? What sort of qualities should he be looking for?
The first one is product stewardship. Okay. Outstanding vendors listen to the customers, translate real operational issues into a clear product roadmap, and they execute against it predictably. In other words, if they say something's going to be released in 6 months, they need to hit those targets. Okay. They don't just talk about innovation, and they deliver it. Second one is partnership discipline. Great vendors are going to be very transparent about what their product does, what it does not do, its weak spots, so you can have true conversations about how to mitigate risk and move things forward. Okay. They don't overpromise in sales and then disappear, after delivery. When something goes wrong, they remain engaged and accountable. The third is people quality and continuity. You need strong technical skills, you need strong managerial skills, and you also need strong interpersonal skills, okay? From the executive sponsor all the way down to the project manager, okay, there needs to be continuity. You don't swap people out. You need to build trust. You need to be able to deliver, again, on any promises that you make, okay? We touched on this a little bit. Execution integrity is just as important, which is kind of what I just covered. But vendors with coherent architecture designed for the cloud rather than stitched together through acquisitions, that avoids hidden integrations and other things that you might run into. So they're executing their architecture very well. Okay. And finally, industry focus and financial stability matter as well. It's great if you can find a vendor that, we understand CPG, we understand aerospace, chemicals, distribution, or whatever, healthcare, so that they have configured this system maybe 80% before you even begin your project, and it's geared towards your industry. So it's the continued communication, the product roadmap, the transparency, delivery against that, the people that are on it, the stability of the people, they're working, their knowledge of the system, as well as the communication, the collaboration that you can establish.
That's excellent. I feel that industry experience is actually quite a very underrated, capability of an ERP vendor. Having that experience where they've done it before, they know what works. So yeah, that's very good.
Right. Yeah, the industry experience can be very critical, particularly when you're bringing a team in and they're, oh, wait a minute, you're in healthcare, but I really only know CPG, or something like that. I know the system, so don't worry, I'll pick it up. But they're not going to know all the little nuances.
Yeah, exactly. So after planning, strategy, system selection, you then advise companies on how they can leverage AI by laying it on top of their already functional ERP system. This is something that's really exciting. What does that process look like in practice, Lee, from the moment an ERP stabilizes?
Okay, that's a really good question. I'm really excited about getting into this topic of conversation. Once the ERP is stabilized, the focus shifts from running transactions to improving decisions and making it more timely. AI layering is not necessarily a plugin, okay? It's a progression. So the first thing that I really try to get into, you can do these things simultaneously, okay, is let's talk about data governance for a second. Okay. It changes once you move into AI. Inside an ERP system, you're mostly dealing with structured transactional data, item masters, orders, inventory, production records, bill of materials, things like that. As soon as you begin thinking about AI, the data landscape shifts.
Mm.
Okay. Now you're dealing with unstructured data or even temporal or semi structured data because you've got your structured data within the ERP, which is your master files, products, pricing, colors, things of that nature. But now there's a whole set of unstructured data, which could be a customer communication, supplier updates, regulatory guidance, quality notes, service logs. You have all this inbound information, either from a regulatory arena or from a customer. And now you've got this unstructured data. So how do you take that and leverage that in as part of your AI program? And then the last piece you're going to have time series data, which goes to promotions. It could be the weather. It could be logistics signals, market
Mm.
indicator. This also doesn't exist in your ERP system. So you have to keep these kinds of data in mind as you go forward. But the real thing is once you're on top of your data, okay, what is the business issue that you're trying to solve? And given the data that you have, what kind of model might you want to use? For example, I'm going to get a little technical here. Mixed integer linear programming is not necessarily AI. You could do it on a spreadsheet or you can run it with a computer program. It's mathematics and it's optimization. It could help you with your footprint. It could help you with tariffs, so forth. But you'll only be able to run that if you have those three classes of data, the structured data, the unstructured data, and the temporal data, all aligned in order to feed that model. So I don't think people may say, okay, data governance. They may or may not really have a clear understanding of that, but it's important to do a deep dive on what that really means. And the second piece is, okay, what are we going to do with the AI to either to boost our decision making, optimize forecasting, optimize our footprint, optimize our logistics, our transportation lines, products, pricing, and all of that, because you'll need the additional data. So you need the right model and you need the right data. Um, that's why I say only once an ERP system is stable is it right to use AI. It's not something that you just bolt on.
Mm.
It's disciplined capabilities that are layered on, and you need to ensure you have the right data and so forth and so on.
Is that a common misconception, from businesses that you've spoken to? Like they come in, they say, right, I want to layer AI on top of it. You have to almost say, no, stop. Let's get everything in order first. Is that a common theme you're seeing?
Yeah, what I'm seeing is I don't see a lot, people will, like I just said, will come up with the data governance, or
Mm.
they may not even be thinking about, okay, what kind of model do I want to be feeding the data to solve what business issue? And so I do see that, and people aren't thinking, oh, we've got structured data, unstructured data. We've got a lot of different sources and types of data, which is what AI can really help you prepare to put into the kind of model that you want to do. It could be a prediction, it could be a classification, it could be a forecast. So you really need to be very specific about it. But then the other guardrails, well, people talk about guardrails, but the other considerations is what is the ROI? Is it that powerful? What learning do I need to do? Because at the end of the day, you may need a very heavy and well-versed statistician that understands the tools that are going to take this data and provide you with the capability or forecast or whatever it is that you're trying to do. So I'm not sure that people are truly thinking about all that. And those are, to me, some really key elements: data and what kind of model that you're going to
Mm.
use, and making sure that AI helps to prepare the data. Because ultimately, if you're not doing that properly, or you don't have anybody that really understands what it takes when you're training and you're creating the model and you're training it, you're just going to end up with poor results.
Mm. Where have you seen firsthand this AI integration have the biggest impact on optimizing a supply chain?
Well, I think people are really trying to forecast demand volatility, okay, and come up with a forecast and make sure there's not a bias. So I think because at the start, many companies doing sales and operations planning, so they'll get their sales organization together, they'll get their operations people together, they're going to want to put together, drive their MRP, their
Mm,
manufacturing, which will, okay, and the way they pull this together. If they don't have a very good forecast and they're not pulling the structured data plus this unstructured data that I talked about and leveraging AI to come up with what they think is a realistic forecast, okay, then any AI, any model that I apply to it is not going to be very good. So I think a lot of people start with sales and operations planning because that's the heart of your supply chain. Um, there could be another one. This will lead now, once you have that going, your inventory management, because basically you want to minimize your inventory. You want to maximize your working capital so you can make investments elsewhere. So again, those are two areas, the S&OP and really the inventory and the inventory policies that you're putting in to achieve a certain customer service level. Is it okay to be at 90% or do you need to be at 96%? In terms of customer service. In a
mm,
hospital, you don't want to show up and say, well, we didn't have enough material in order to do your particular procedure today, or we couldn't do a diagnostic. That's not acceptable. In that case, you need to have 100%.
mm.
But in other businesses, it may be perfectly fine to achieve 90 or 96%.
Yeah, excellent. So Lee, we like to save these last few questions for giving a bit of insight and advice from your experience. So, just looking back at some of the things you've done, you've delivered high value outcomes like 30% inventory reduction and eliminated $1 to $2 million chargebacks. What do those successful projects usually have in common behind the scenes? Like, is there a common point in terms of decision making, trade offs, behaviors?
Yeah, basically, what they have in common across this is disciplined, detailed decision making, but not necessarily a heroic effort. Okay. The decisions, in order to drive inventory down or eliminate chargebacks or achieve any other particular goal, starts with really understanding the problem at a detailed level and the best way to approach it. Okay. So your decisions are explicit as you go about navigating and addressing these issues. And the other thing that you may want to do is you need to make some trade offs. For example, if your retail scorecard is, at what point is acceptability okay for that organization? Do you really need 100 or can you be at 90%? Because to achieve 100, that may mean you're tying up all sorts of working capital inventory. And the reality that may not make sense. So maybe you really need to only have a select number of SKUs and colors and whatever in
Mm,
order to achieve a comfortable level of customer scorecards because the retailers, for instance, are always going to want you to have everything in stock so that every single order can be fulfilled in a timely manner. Okay. So I mentioned this early, but it's the analytics and the attention to detail. Are you looking at the right KPIs, and are you monitoring this on a frequent basis? And what do you need to do to make this even better? And finally, collaboration both internally across different silos, but also collaboration with your business partners, your customers will yield the best results. And once you have everybody aligned with that and on board, then you can achieve these kind of significant benefits across your supply chain.
excellent. And Lee, I really want to finish this chat on AI
Sure.
layering. It interests me a lot. If a leadership team, if they want to push for go live quickly with their AI layering, they want to really get it up and running. What non-negotiable guardrails do you insist that are in place before doing so?
Okay. So when leadership wants to move fast with AI, I don't necessarily slow them down, but I insist on the guardrails. Speed without any discipline is going to destroy value. Okay, so in this case, decision authority needs to be explicit. Every AI supported recommendation must have a named owner with the authority to make decisions, override it, stop it. Okay, If no one has this decision-making authority and is accountable for this, then the AI could quickly start destroying value. We talked about data integrity a number of times, okay? Data integrity at the point when you're making decisions is non-negotiable. So the data feeding the model, its quality, whether it's external signals, the ERP data or whatever, it needs to really be trusted. It needs to be monitored. It needs to be tested so that your training and then the results of your training are always consistently also being monitored so you know that your model is going to give you back whatever it is that you're looking for. The economic intent or the ROI must be also upfront, okay? There has to be, the AI needs to be tied to a specific output, and the earlier you can do that, the better off you're going to be. It's kind of like a capital budgeting model. If somebody submits and they want to make an expenditure, there needs to be a return. Somebody wants to get an AI, unless you're experimenting, learning, and things of that nature, there needs to be a return. Another thing that's critical is that there must be a human in the loop, okay? And in this case, this person should have time to do some critical thinking, not only about your data, but also what the model is doing, how it's interpreting it, and how to best leverage the AI. So you need, people talk about jobs are going to be replaced by AI. I don't necessarily buy into that fully. I think you're always going to need the critical reality, human thinking aspect serving as a guardrail on this, okay? And the last one is the ability to absorb change. And if the AI is saying something, can you really respond to that in real time? And does it make sense? Okay. So moving too fast can destabilize your operation. So even though AI is meant to improve it, you need to make sure you're moving at a speed that you can manage and operate your business safely. Without these, and you're just following the AI, you're going to maybe take a left turn, and no one's going to be happy. So you don't necessarily slow the speed down. Just make sure you're taking the right steps in order to leverage AI properly.
Excellent. Well, Lee, you've been a brilliant guest. Thank you so much for sharing your practical insight, your real world experiences, particularly around what it really takes to stabilize supply chain operations, and how to apply AI in a way that actually delivers value. So thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate this opportunity, and I really thought you gave a lot of thought to how this can work well and
Thank you very
structured
much,
it well.
Lee.
So thank you.
And thank you all for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.